But it's so tempting when you go to a wonderful gathering of people like this, using their vacation time to think about the work of the kingdom. I told you last night God was so delighted, this wonderful Father of ours, so thrilled about our being here now. And one of the reasons why he is so thrilled is that we are willing to give up holiday time, vacation time. You people, you men, I appreciate it tremendously. For some of you, it really means that there won't be much other vacation time. You certainly will have your reward. You are putting first things first, and the whole of the year will be blessed by it. And God is rejoicing because of it. I trust that you all had as good a night as you could possibly have. I mean, there are reasons for not having a good night. One of them is not that you slept in a strange bed. That's not a reason for not having a good night. That's just an act of faith. You see, all those people who are convinced they never sleep well the first night in a strange bed, their faith is rewarded. They get exactly what they expected. It's basic to New Testament theology from Jesus that you get what you expect. So you might as well start practicing about sleeping the first night in a strange bed. Theologically now I'm speaking. And if ever the Lord calls you to travel as much as he has called Elsie and myself to travel, you'll be thankful that you don't keep missing out on those first nights. But there is, of course, another area which you haven't got control over, and that may be the people who are in your room. Now, I've got control over the people in my room because the people in my room is, if I may get it grammatically correct, my wife. So if she starts snoring, I know what to do about that. But if I'm sleeping as I was with a group of men in Australia for the 4th International, and one of them snored all night, I can't do anything about that except offer it to the Lord with thanksgiving and with love. And as that doesn't come naturally to me, I have to ask for help. And you know, the Lord did help me because he said, have you realized, Norman, that he isn't doing it in order to keep you awake? Funny how odd our reactions, how judgmental we are. We are awfully tempted to say, they're doing it just to aggravate me. They're not. They're just doing it. Period. And you can rest if you will rest in love and offer it up to the Lord. I'm not sure that we need sleep, but we do need rest. So if you happen to be in that situation, then take it as a great opportunity, first of all, for loving the person who's doing it, for forgiving them because, as Jesus said, they don't know what they're doing, and how true that is of those who snore, and then spend the rest of the night quietly meditating, living in the Word, living with the Word, taking, if you like, that tremendous phrase that I used last night, that Christ says, you can be at home with me, and I'll be at home with you. You can't get closer than that, can you? Francis of Assisi spent the whole night once just saying, "Oh God, how great thou art." That's all. So, we're entering into the first full day, and already you are anticipating it with joy. The title of my talk this morning is that we're called to be kings and queens in our own castle. And in a way, I ought to give my second talk straight away, because you might misunderstand the first one. If you do misunderstand it, then just hold it in your hand for a while until I get to the second one. But it is important to start where I'm going to start. And I'd like to start in Luke's Gospel in the second chapter. A well-known passage which we usually hear too early in life and don't understand. When I went to the Wailing Wall, the western wall of the temple in Jerusalem, the only wall that still remains of the old temple, I saw there not only the people who were praying, but also little groups of males surrounding usually one boy of about 12 years of age, and he was given the Torah, a scroll with the law of the Lord, and he was given it by his male relatives, his father, if he were alive, his grandfather, and his uncles, and his male cousins who were older than he. All male cousins younger than he, and all the women folk in the family were the other side of the fence, just watching, because Judaism is a religion for males, and every Jew gives thanks at least once a week that he was not born a woman. Aren't you thankful for Jesus? Amen. I'm thankful that I, as a man, am not so full of hubris, pride, as to think that it's all that important to be a man. I think it's important to be a person, to be alive. I happen to be a man. It wasn't my choice, I happen to be. I'm happy with it because that's the way I'm made. But I'm not proud of it. But this boy then is surrounded by his males, and he is initiated into Judaism, and he becomes an adult at the age of 12. In recent years, we have lowered the age of majority in the UK from 21 to 18. I believe it's 18 now with you, isn't it? That's right, you can vote at 18 and all that sort of thing. But in Judaism, it's 12. They mature swiftly there, always have done. Yes, it's a fact, they always have done in every way, and that's the meaning of this story. When the feast was ended, they'd gone up to Jerusalem when Jesus was 12, and he had been initiated into adulthood. And when the feast was ended and they were returning, the boy, Jesus, yes, he's still a boy, but yet he is an adult, remained behind in Jerusalem. Now, his parents didn't know this. Well, you know all the rest of that story, don't you? I'd love to read it all because it makes such good reading. But let me come to the bit where at last they find him. And he says, "How is it that you had to look for me? Did you not see and know that it is necessary for me to be in my Father's house and occupied about my Father's business?" He is saying to them, why couldn't you be adult and use your head? It's funny how often parents don't seem to be able to use their head, isn't it? If I may say to that to the first 3 rows. It is funny how very often adults are not willing to be adult. And Jesus says, why weren't you adult enough to know where I was bound to be? They shouldn't have had to spend all that time raking through Jerusalem. They should have made a beeline for where they knew or should have known where he would be, in his Father's house, involved now in his Father's business. But because he understood that the bridge between childhood and adulthood is called adolescence, and because adolescence is the most dramatic period of anyone's life, more changes take place in your life in that period. More decisions have to be made. So he took it gently. And he went back with them to Nazareth. And it says he was disciplined by them. He came under their authority and their guidance because they were, after all, his parents. So that's worth remembering too, isn't it? But in that period between wanting to feel that you are adult and actually becoming adult, it's awfully good to continue to have the help of good parents. I look back and wonder what on earth would have happened to me if at the age of 13 and a half, when I became a Christian and was baptized into the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, became, as it were, an adult in the things of Christ, and yet only a newborn babe, if I had decided at that moment that I didn't need anybody else to help me, and certainly not my parents, oh, what a mess my life would have come into. And yet, everybody has to become at some point king or queen in their own castle. If you turn to the last, I don't want you to do it now, but if you turn sometime to the last 5 chapters of the book of Judges, you will notice that it reads like any one of our national newspapers. It's full of crime reporting. Nothing new in the paper today isn't in the book of Judges, in those 5 chapters. Shocking stories. And there is a repeated statement which says, in those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. In fact, that's the last statement of the book of Judges. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And when you read those last 5 chapters, you think, yes, and what a mess it was. What anarchy. And yet I want to take that phrase and not use it negatively, but use it positively. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And if you use it positively like that, it means that you must, at some time, take responsibility for your own life. And that's the one thing we don't want to do. And we have 2 marvelous alibis. One is our heredity. Some people even go far enough to say, I didn't even want to be born. Have you heard people say that sometimes? I have in my pastoral experience. I've heard people whose lives are in a mess say to me, I never asked to be born. What are they doing? They're rebelling against their heredity, against all those who have actually given them life. Sometimes people put it another way. They say, well, of course, you know, I got this from my parents or my grandparents or my great-grandparents. It's not my fault. That comes out in the most favorite way by people saying, well, yes, I'm getting rheumatism now. You see, my mother used to have rheumatism, and my grandmother had rheumatism. Now I've got it. That's heredity. And of course the doctors will tell you don't have to have it because the others had it, but you have a tendency toward it, so you better watch out. Heredity is that which has come to us without any of us asking. You may have a beautiful face. People may say, oh, isn't she beautiful? Or isn't he handsome? Well, no need to be proud about it. Nothing to do with you, is it? It's your heredity. It happens to be the way the genes came out for you. You know, not the jeans you wear, but the other kind of jeans. And if you've got a big nose like me, don't let it worry you. Don't let it worry you. It's not your fault. I didn't choose it. It was given me. It came by heredity, so I'm not responsible. And if other people think it's ugly, well, that's their problem, isn't it? We take some things far too personally. There are some things you can shrug off and say, well, it's nothing really to do with me. The other big cop-out, of course, is our environment. See, that fellow Renshaw is odd because he had the bad luck to be born in England. That's my environment. I mean, you might say that. I could put it another way. But environment, the kind of family you're born in. And there are some sociologists who will say, tell me what your environment is, and I'll tell you what kind of person you're going to be. Tell me that you were born in a ghetto in a great city in the United States of America, and I'll tell you that you will be a criminal by the age of 17. And statistically, they're very often right. Though, of course, they've left out something that we're going to come to, not this morning, but in my next talk. But heredity, then, you see, and environment control us in the beginning of our lives. And the result is it's so easy to say, it's not my fault. Of course, the oldest story in the Bible is about that. Perhaps we're not tuned in properly. Do you want to come up, Chuck?
No, that's fine.
That's fine. But it's going to be improved. We hope. Because I could do without all these, actually, but while they're here, I'll use them. And I suppose one of them's recording anyhow. You remember that God put Adam and Eve in a garden. Now, some people think that means he gave them a perpetual holiday, a perpetual vacation. All gardeners know that isn't true. In fact, if you take a holiday from your garden, in a month's time, it'll be a wilderness, won't it? The best way to run a garden is to do a little every day. And it's good. It's work, but it's good. So when Adam was told, you look after the garden, he wasn't given a holiday. He was given a job of work to do. And it was good work, and he enjoyed it. There was one area that he was told not to interfere with. And you know, the odd thing about that is, isn't it, as soon as we're told, don't go there, that's the very place we want to go to, isn't it? There's something in us. It's something of that independence which perhaps God has given us. Something which says, look, I'm me. Or perhaps more correctly, I'm I. And what am I going to do when other people tell me I must not do that? The great Augustine of Hippo said, we only went scrumping for the apples. We only went into the orchard and pinched the apples because the notice said, do not trespass. If the notice hadn't said do not trespass, we wouldn't have wanted to go in and get them. That's the difficulty about the law. It's there for our good, but we have this itch to disregard it, and it causes our death. Paul elaborated it at great length, but there it is in a nutshell. And when God puts his laws, he doesn't put them for fun. He doesn't put them so that we will make life awkward. He doesn't put them as a killjoy. He puts them for our good. I don't know whether those of you who went to London have ever been on the underground there. It's one of the easiest ways to get around, but you can't see much, of course. But it's electric power on the rail. So there's the rails that the train runs on, and there's a third rail which has enough electricity in it to drive the train. And so when you come to the station, and you're down there in the tunnel there and the station, there's a notice which says, live rail, danger, keep off. And you better. Because if you don't, you'll be electrocuted. You will not be electrocuted because the station master comes along and says, I saw you touch the electric rail. I saw you. Oh, yes, I've got eyes all over the place. This is my station. I saw you. And now I'm going to electrocute you. Yeah, you laugh, but that's how people think the judgment of God comes, don't they? They think God's got his beady eye on us all the time with his little book out, and I've got it all written down, and I'll catch up with you one day, Norman. It's not like that at all. I electrocute myself. And God weeps. He says, Norman, don't do it. He doesn't say, don't you dare do it. He says, don't do it. He says, don't start going after alcohol. All that those people who want to sell it say are lies. We've got a great statement in Britain which says, you're twice the man on alcohol. And they've got some sportsman doing some tremendous thing. I, as a sportsman, know that's a lie. You're half the man on alcohol. That's the truth. And so when God says to me, oh, don't get into that business, Norman. He's not saying it, don't you get into that business or else I'll punish you in hell. He's saying, Norman, if you get into that business, you'll be in hell. And you ask any alcoholic, where is he living? In heaven or in hell? Now, it isn't reserved for him. He makes it, and he lives in it. So when God says, don't get into drugs, all that people tell you about how marvelous it is to have the high and all the rest of it, don't do it. Not because God says, don't you do it or else, but he says, oh, my beloved one, don't do it or else. You will get hurt. And when he says to me, as a married man, now don't start looking out at other women and start thinking you're falling in love with other people, because that will ruin your life. That won't bring you any joy. It won't bring you any joy. It won't bring your wife any joy. It won't bring your children any joy. It certainly won't bring your church any joy. Don't do it. You see, God is a loving Father. And the rules that he sets are not there so that we may have a bad life. They're there so that we can have a good life. So when he said to Adam and Eve in this marvelously symbolic story, don't do that, he wasn't saying it, don't do that because. He was saying, don't do that because that won't help you at all. And then, of course, they went and did it. But the point I'm really coming to, although I'm not unhappy to have said the other things, thank you, Lord, I didn't know I was going to this morning, is this. When God looked for them at the end of the day, of course God knew where they were, he knows everything, and he is everywhere. But they thought they were hiding from him, didn't they? They hid from him in the cool of the evening, and God said, where are you, Adam? And Adam says, well, I'm hiding. Well, what's the matter? And then he has to admit. But you remember what Adam said? It wasn't my fault, Lord. Oh, no. It was her fault. So God, in his infinite wisdom and patience, leaves Adam for the time being on the back burner, so to speak, and goes off to Eve and says, well, Eve, what's the trouble? Oh, it wasn't my fault, Lord. It was the serpent. It's called passing the buck. It's belonging to the somebody else club. Not me. Oh, it wasn't me. It was somebody else. The unfortunate thing with the serpent was there wasn't anybody else after the serpent. The buck stopped there. But God didn't stop there. He dealt with the serpent, then he came back and dealt with the woman, and then he came back and dealt with the man, which is the important point that I'm making. You've got to be responsible for your own life. You've got to be responsible for your own failures, your own decisions. A young fellow, well, he's not all that young, he's in his 40s, I suppose, when this happened to him, a man I knew quite well. Unknown to him, his wife was unfaithful to him. She continued to live with him, but she was unfaithful to him. And suddenly he discovered it. She'd been unfaithful for about 4 years. So his male ego was really shattered. And he fell apart. And he landed up with a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist listened to his story and listened to his family history. And he said to him in the end, it's not your fault. It's all the fault of your mother. because your mother favored your elder brother. And you better go and tell her so. So though the mother was in her 70s, this 40-year-old went to the mother and said, "It's not my fault." Oh, how quickly men become small boys. And he poured it all out to this aged Christian woman. It was all untrue. I knew the family very well. It was not true that the parents had favored one son over the other. But this advisor had cottoned on to this and put it to him and given him a way out, given him an alibi, and so he trotted off with his alibi and said, "It's not my fault that my marriage fell apart. It's your fault, mother." That's not being an adult, is it? I think one of the most marvelous psalms is the 51st Psalm, where David says, "Against thee and thee only have I sinned and done this great wrong." He took the blame. You remember what he took the blame for? He took the blame for falling in love with his neighbor's wife and then having intercourse with her. And then when he found she was pregnant, mind he was king at the time, and kings in those days were supposed to be able to please themselves. When he found she was pregnant, he decided the best thing was to get her husband home from the army, and that would cover all the tracks up, but it didn't. And so finally, he got the man killed in battle. It's a terrible story, isn't it? How low can you get? How wicked can you be? But mind you, he was king, and kings do all sorts of things in those days. But he came to understand through that wonderful visitation he had from God through the prophet Nathan. And Nathan said to him, "You're the man." But you see, I've got to say, I'm the man. Against thee and thee only have I sinned, O God. I have to take responsibility for my own actions. And the quicker you learn to do it, the better. Some people in their 70s haven't learned to do it. And some people in their 17 have learned to do it. The quicker you can learn to do it, the better. And that means you've got to stand back, and this is the bit you might well misunderstand, and so I ask you to hang in until you hear my next talk. But that means you've got to begin to stand back from other external authorities. However good they may have been, my grandparents on my mother's side were atheistic alcoholics, both of them. And therefore my mother was a total abstainer from alcohol, and so, as it happened, was my father. So of course I became a total abstainer from alcohol, largely because I loved my parents, and then because, as I've told you 2 or 3 times, I was so in to the sporting world that I wasn't going to spoil my chances by drinking alcohol. And then I passed that on to my children, particularly as my wife also agreed with me, so our 3 daughters were grown up to be total abstainers from alcohol. And I can recall my eldest daughter coming to me one day, I suppose she was about 18, she said, "Dad, I've now decided not to drink alcohol because I don't want to drink it. Up to now I haven't drunk alcohol because you didn't want me to drink it. But now I've decided not to drink it because I don't want to drink it." I said, "Wonderful. That's fine." Because, of course, I'm not everywhere. She got to make her own decision. I couldn't always be keeping my eye on her. I could make sure when she was little what she did, but as she grew up, I've got to step back, and she has to make decisions. And woe betide me as a parent if I think that I'm going to go on making all the decisions, because I won't be around when many of them have to be taken. And in any case, they can always do it behind my back, can't they? So I rejoiced when the day came when she said, "It is now my decision not to drink alcohol." Why did I rejoice? Because if it was her decision, she had taken responsibility for it. And that meant that she herself would govern that part of her life. Our middle daughter Elizabeth fell in love with a fellow who was mad on motorbikes. He had a motorbike, a beautiful motorbike, and as he was in the motor car industry, he was training to be and was indeed a qualified mechanic. He had a beautiful motorbike. But I'd always told my children that the most dangerous place on the road is on the pillion seat of a motorbike. And as I had three daughters, and they were most likely to sit on the pillion seat of a motorbike rather than drive one, I said to them, "You want to watch that?" So when Elizabeth fell in love with this fella, she said, "I'm not going to go on your motorbike." And because he was so much in love with her, he used to drive to our house on his motorbike, park it there, walk up the road with her, get on a bus and go into the city to go to the pictures. You can imagine what that meant to him. But he loved her, you see. You'd do anything then. Then after 2 or 3 years, she said to me one day, "Dad, next Monday," it was what we call a bank holiday in England, it's a public holiday, "we're going to the motor racing meet about 20 miles from where we live." I said, "Yes." Then she paused and looked at me. She said, "Mick would very much like it if we went with the motorbike." A bank holiday, you know, like your Labour Day or your Memorial Day. You know what the roads are like then, don't you? Going to a motorcycle meet, you know what it's like after that, don't you? Everybody thinks that they're at the motorcycle meet. I said to her, "Well, Elizabeth, it's your decision. But let me just point out, that's my part, isn't it? I've got to take responsibility for being her friend. No good my washing my hands and say, 'Please yourself, it's your responsibility.' I also have a responsibility. I have to be king in my castle where my children are concerned. I was inquiring that she should be queen in her castle and make up her mind. But I had my part to play, and so I said, 'I just want to remind you that statistically, it is the most dangerous place you can be on the road, especially more dangerous on a bank holiday, and even more dangerous associated with a race meeting. And I want to tell it to you now, rather than remind you if by chance you end up in a hospital ward and unable to walk. I don't want you looking at me then and saying, 'Dad, why didn't you remind me?' So I'm reminding you now, but it's your decision. Why did I play it that way? Well, because she got to become an adult. And if I had said, 'Don't you dare do that,' supposing she'd gone around the corner and got on the motorbike there. The point is, she has to decide. Now, of course, you're itching to know what she decided, aren't you? I'd love to go on to another part of my family where one of my daughters made a disastrous marriage. I knew it was disastrous, Elsie knew it was disastrous. We told her, she thought it was good. 5 years later, she knew it was disastrous and said to me, "I did the wrong thing." I said, "Yes." She said, "You knew at the time." I said, "Yes." I said, "I told you." She said, "I wasn't listening." That's right. Actually, Elizabeth didn't go on the motorbike. But you've got to make your own mind up, because you are responsible. God has made us like that. He's made us in His image. And the great thing we share with God is that we have the power to decide. We have freedom of choice. That's why I wrote my book and gave it the title, No Strings Attached. We're not controlled by anybody. Or the beginning of life we are. We have to be. Goodness me, if they hadn't fed and watered me and taught me to walk and taught me to speak, I'd still be, well, I wouldn't even be, would I? I'd have died. Well, I needed all that help. But then I have to mature and come to the place where I take my own decisions. I've talked about two of my daughters. I might as well tell you about the third one. The youngest and I were walking one Sunday afternoon on holiday by the sea. We went every summer for about 10 years to stay with my parents at the seaside. But now, I was brought up in a lovely Christian home, but we were very strict about Sunday. We didn't notice it because Sunday consisted of going to church in the morning with my mother and father, going home and having a super meal, which somehow got cooked hot, though my mother was in church, before the days of automatic ovens and even regulos or anything like that. She was a whiz kid, my mum, as far as that sort of thing was concerned. Then my father and us three boys all went to Sunday school in the afternoon, where he was superintendent, and it was such a fun thing. We walked there with him and back, and we enjoyed that. And in the evening, when we were old enough, we all went to church in the evening, so really, there wasn't much time to do anything else, was there? We didn't notice that we weren't doing this or that or the other. One of the things we never did, though we lived by the sea, we never went swimming on a Sunday. Or we go swimming on a Saturday or any other day of the week, but not on a Sunday. And because I had taken this into myself, I passed it on to my family. That wasn't difficult because I worked every Sunday. I was a minister. And there wasn't much time for anything else on Sunday. In England we have two services, morning and evening. And I preached at both of them for 32 years. And often something in the afternoon. For years we had Sunday school in the afternoon. So there wasn't much else that we did. So when we went on holiday with my parents, we always went to church in the morning, and my father would even look for a Sunday school in the afternoon on holiday. We always took our best clothes with us just to wear on the 2 Sundays we were away. Well, I didn't go as far as that. We took our best clothes to wear on Sunday, and we went to church in the morning when I was on holiday with my children, but we didn't look for a Sunday school in the afternoon. We were getting liberal. But we didn't go on the beach either. We walked sedately beside it. I had my jacket off. My little 10-year-old girl, Anne, had her nice Sunday dress on. And there were all the people on the beach. You know, about 90% of the population. Sunbathing, surfing, playing games, and we were walking sedately along the cliff path. And suddenly, Anne, who was holding my hand, gave it a little pull, little communication sound, you know, and looked up and stopped, and she said, "Daddy, do you really think God would be angry with us if we went on the beach?" And I heard it. And I saw the way the words had been put together, and I saw the punctuation. There was not a question mark at the end. There was an exclamation mark. She wasn't asking me a question. She was making a statement about being wise, like all women, even when they're 10. She voiced it as if it was a question, but it wasn't a question. "Daddy, do you think God would really be angry with us if we went on the beach?" And I suddenly realized that I had been trapped in by all my past, and that she had a greater understanding of the truth at that moment than I had. And so I looked down at her and I said, "Anne, I don't think he would be. Now, I don't think that will mean that you will now decide never to come to church with me on a Sunday. But if, having been to church with me on a Sunday, you want to go on the beach, I'm happy." But then I said to her, "But you'll have to be patient with me. It'll take me some time to get round to that." Because, you see, these external authorities are so powerful. And you know, the odd thing is, if you think you've thrown off the external authority of your parents, what have you done? Taken on the external authority of your peers? There's not much sense in that, is there? The boys in my class and in my school knew even less than I did. So why take guidance from them? At least my mother and father lived longer than they had, and might well have more wisdom. Indeed, did have more wisdom. What a stupid thing to say, I don't want any help from my parents or my Sunday school teacher or my minister or anybody above the age of 18, and I will turn to all the wisdom of those who are as stupid as I am. Well, that's what you do if you take your peer group. My peer group wanted me to do all sorts of things that I didn't want to do, and I didn't do it. But then I told you one of the reasons I didn't do it. One was I'd become a Christian when I was young, and the other is I was too much in to wanting myself to be able to accomplish certain things. And so I was better at school in many games than anybody else. And I wasn't going to be misled by anybody saying to me, take drugs, take alcohol, smoke. Smoke? I wouldn't have smoked. I didn't even know in those days that it kills you, but I knew that it shortened your breath. And I wanted to last the whole way through the match and be more strong than anybody else at the end of the match. So I wasn't going to do what my other idiots did. Let them have them, and then I could beat them. Be brought down by them? You see, that's what's the foolish thing. People say, oh, I don't go to church now. Grown-ups say this. It's not the in thing. That's all out of date. I do what my contemporaries do. What do their contemporaries do? Good things? Broken marriages? Alcoholism? Into drugs in a more odd way than the young people? Drugs to wake them up in the morning, drugs to put them to sleep at night? Is that the contemporary way to live? I don't want to live like many of my contemporaries live. Into their second or their third marriage? I'm into my first, and it's 39 years old, and I'm happier in it today than I've ever been. And I believe in it. It's better than broken marriages. My kids think it's better. They're not involved in all the hoo-ha of that. Gosh, if I took it the way my peers take it, what a mess my life would have been. I'm going to be king in my own castle, but I'm not going to be daft enough to let them boss me. So watch, you see, who is really king in your own castle? Who is? Even your church can't be. If I'd let my church be king in my castle, I would never have got into the healing movement. I'd only been out of college 2 years when I was reading the New Testament in the Greek, and I came across one of the reports of the healing ministry of Jesus, and because I was reading it in the Greek, which is more true to the original, it is almost the original. I mean, I haven't got the very one that was written by Mark, unfortunately. That's the best one. Every translation becomes less good. But the further back you get, the better it is. And if you get back to the language, it's better. And as I read it, I knew in a blinding flash that I got to be involved in the healing ministry. I remember I went downstairs, my study was upstairs, I went down and I told Elsie, and we both groaned. We said, oh no, Lord, no. I said, oh, I don't want that. It's bad enough trying to convert them without trying to heal them. So leave me just with the preaching work. Don't get me involved in the healing work. And he said, you read the book. Read the manual. You know, when you buy a new motor car, you better read the manual. This is the manual. So I read it. I read all of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and I marked every part that spoke about healing. My goodness, there's such a lot of it. Then I went into the Acts of the Apostles, a whole chunks there. Then I went into church history. It's always been there. But if I had said, but my church didn't believe in it, then I would have turned away from my Lord. And that which my church has now got, they wouldn't have got so quickly. I've had a part in the Baptists in Britain getting into the healing ministry. Because I refuse to say, oh, if my church tells me not to, then it must be true. Oh, no. Oh, no, I'm a Jesus Christ man. And Jesus is the head of the church. That came home vividly to me in 2 dreams I had one night. I had a funny dream last night. I don't know really what it means, but I won't really bother you with that one. Ask me at lunchtime. One night, I dreamt twice about being back at college, what you would call seminary. My training was 4 years in the University of Bristol and in the Baptist College in Bristol, running side by side. The Baptist College in Bristol is the oldest non-conformist college in the world. Doesn't make it the best, but it is the oldest. It is the best as well, but... We had a man who was the principal of that college called Arthur Dakin. He was in his early 60s when I arrived there as a student. He was a man of very independent thought, and he required all of us to be independent in our thinking. But actually, we were all scared stiff of him. He didn't want us to be, but we were. We called him the old man, behind his back, of course. And he really put the fear of God into us. Now, these 2 dreams happened to me a long time after that. It must be now about 15 or 20 years ago. The first dream was quite short. This man came to me in my dream. Actually, he was now dead, but he came to me in my dream and he said, Mr. Renshaw. In college, they always called you Mr. Renshaw. As soon as you left college, you were called Renshaw. That's to show you were brothers in the ministry, you see. Anyhow, Mr. Renshaw, he comes to me and says, why, he used to stroke his nose like that. Why didn't you wind up the college clocks? Now, we only had 1 clock in the college as far as I could remember. But the important thing was my answer. I said to him, nobody ever asked me to wind up the college clocks. If anybody had asked me, and if I'd taken the responsibility of doing it, I'd have done it. Then I woke up. And I thought, wow, what a way to talk to the old man. Then I went to sleep again. And blow me, I was back in college again. And now I was taking the chair of a study group. All of them in the group were my fellow students, except the college principal who sat beside me. But I was in charge. And so I don't know what we were discussing, but went here and there and so on and so on. And he had his say. And after a bit I said, don't you think he's spoken enough? Why don't we take his head off? And everybody in the group agreed with me, so I took his head off and put it on the floor in front of me. And we got on with the discussion. Only, of course, he couldn't say anything. After about half an hour of that, I said, shall we let him say something? And they said yes. So I picked his head up and put it back on again. Then I woke up. I said, Lord, you're telling me something. You're telling me that I've got to be my own man. That external authority, good as it was, is not governing my life. I must be my man. I must not be afraid of my congregation. I must not be afraid of my training. I must not be directed by others. I've got to take responsibility myself. I can tell you it changed my life. It was one of the great turning points of my life. From then on, I did begin to become my own man. And I want all of you to be sure that you are king or queen in your own life. That's heady stuff for my young friends and challenging stuff for my older friends who've never done it. Because some of you won't have done it. Some of you will still be governed by parents who've long time gone to heaven. Or by churches that say to you, don't you put your hand up if you want to put your hand up. Or do put your hand up when you don't want to put your hand up. Or by a contemporary scene that tells you that the politicians are going to work out all the problems for us. We've got to become our own people. And of course, when the Israelites said, we want a king, Samuel was very put out, and he went to the Lord and he said, they don't want me anymore, they want a king. And God said, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. But don't forget to remind them of how difficult it is under a king. It is. And now you'll expect me to say in my next talk, but you do need help. You do. And the best help is from God. Yes. But I have a strong feeling you'll be amazed at what I tell you about that when it comes. In those days, in these days, everyone must make their own decisions and be king or queen in their own life. The greatest decision, of course, is to say to this Christ, come in. But oh, how fascinating, how challenging, how enriching are the terms by which he comes. Let us pray. Holy Spirit, we ask for your help at the beginning of this talk, and we ask you to continue as we reflect upon it. If any of it has been challenging or hurtful to anyone, just you guard that for the time being, and let us all be patient to see what you're going to go on to say next time I speak. And we thank you for the arrival today of Hope Peel. Thank you for her fine Christian spirit and all her experience in the things of the kingdom. We rejoice in her fellowship. And we praise you for all that this day holds for us on from now. And as we have the right to make decisions about it, help us to make the right decisions. We speak in your name, Lord Jesus Christ, you with whom we live, you who live with us, in your name, to your Father and our Father, to your God and our God. And all the people said, Amen.